Salvete omnes. This is exercise A of chapters 46 and 47. We are focusing this chapter on dependent subjunctive clauses, fearing clauses, and indirect questions. Quick review for fearing clauses, introduced by verbs of fearing like timeo, timere, timui, no fourth principal part, and the deponent verb vereor, vereri, veritus sum. Remember, deponent verbs are passive in form, active in meaning. So a verb of fearing like timeo or vereor. Then the conjunction ne or ut. Ne for what you are afraid will happen, or for what you're afraid is happening or has happened. So that's the positive. Ne is the positive. Because you're afraid and you don't want the thing to happen, you're saying, please don't let that happen. Ne, don't let that happen. Because you think it will. Ut is the opposite. Ut is for what you are afraid will not happen, or what you're afraid is not happening or has not happened. Then followed by the subjunctive. Indirect questions introduced by a verb of saying, asking, thinking, something like that, and then an interrogative. So an interrogative word, who, what, where, when, why, how, plus the subjunctive. You should always be able to find the direct question inside the indirect question. So for example, I know what you're doing. The direct question is, what are you doing? But I know what you are doing. So we have recast that direct question as an indirect question. What tense of the subjunctive should you use? Well, it all depends upon the main verb that introduces the clause. Sequence of tenses, make sure you know this well. Primary sequence, where the main verb introducing the subjunctive clause is present, future, future perfect, present subjunctive, or imperative, then the verb in the dependent clause will be a present subjunctive for contemporaneous or subsequent action, and a perfect subjunctive if the clause is a prior action to the main verb. Secondary sequence handles the past tenses, imperfect, perfect, and pluperfect tenses. If one of those is the tense of your main verb, then you have two options for the subjunctive verb in the dependent clause. The tense of the verb will be either the imperfect subjunctive for contemporaneous or subsequent action, and then for prior action to the main verb, you'll use the pluperfect subjunctive. So let's look at number one. So una or prima, sententia prima. He feared that I would run. He feared that I would run. Okay, we have a fearing clause because we have a verb of fearing. So he feared. When did he fear it? Well, he feared it in the past. So past tense, we're in secondary sequence. Perfect tense, he feared, ed, feared. What did he fear? Well, we have a noun clause, a substantive clause, that I would run. So what did he fear? That I would run. When does this action of running happen in relationship to the main verb? We know the main verb is secondary sequence. It has to be, it's perfect tense. So are we going to use the imperfect subjunctive? Is this action contemporaneous or subsequent? Or is this action prior? The prior action would be, he feared that I had run. I had already done the thing. It's not. He feared that I would do this, contemporaneously. It could even be subsequently, but it's definitely this one. We definitely want the imperfect subjunctive here. So he feared. We want either timuit, third person singular perfect of timeo, or veritus est. Veritus est, the third person singular perfect of vereor. That I would run. Now, that's what he feared would happen. The positive, what would happen. He didn't want it to happen. That's what he feared would happen. So we're going to use ne. We're going to use ne. Then the imperfect subjunctive of curro, currere, cucuri, cursus. And then we end up with timuit, or veritus est, ne currerem. Timuit, ne currerem. What did he fear? Ne currerem. That I would run. Ne currerem. May you not run. That's what he feared. Optime, we have secunda, sententia secunda. We fear that they are not fleeing. We fear that they are not fleeing. So we fear. We fear is present tense. So we are in primary sequence. Our options for the dependent subjunctive verb are present or perfect. That they are not fleeing. So this action of fleeing, it is happening at the same time as us fearing this in the present. At the same time that we are afraid, they are not fleeing. Contemporaneous happens at the same time. So we want the present subjunctive of fugio, fugere, fugi, fugitus. So we fear. Timemus, timemus, or veremur, veremur, that they are not fleeing. They are not. So we want the negative for fearing clauses. That's ut. Ne is for what you are afraid will happen. Ut is for what you are afraid is not happening. So timemus ut or veremur ut. Fleeing, we want the present subjunctive. So fugiant, fugiant. Timemus ut fugiant. Veremur ut fugiant. Optime, tertia, sententia tertia. I feared that they would not yield. I feared that they would not yield. I feared. First person singular, perfect tense. You can use timeo or vereor. So timui or veritus sum. And what did I fear? That they would not yield. This is the substantive, the noun clause. What I fear, that they would not yield. Okay, so it's a negative. We want the ut. And we are in secondary sequence because the main verb is perfect tense, feared in the past, that they would not contemporaneously or subsequently to the main verb. So I feared last week that at that same time, they would not yield. To yield, that's kedo, kedere, kessi, two s's, kessus, like to seed. So timui, ut, kederent, kederent. We want the imperfect subjunctive. Or veritus sum, ut kederent. Quarta, sententia quarta. They feared that he was not present. They feared that he was not present. They feared. So fearing clause, perfect tense, secondary sequence, third person plural. So timuerunt, if you want to use the perfect tense. The perfect of verior would be veritisunt, veritisunt. You could also throw in the imperfect here if the action in the past they feared were a continuous action. They were fearing. They kept on fearing that he was not present. So timebant or verebantur. Stick with the perfect if you want to. Either way, we are in secondary sequence. So timuerunt, that he was not present. This is the negative. We want ut. And then present. So ad sum, ad esse, ad fui, ad futurus, and we want the imperfect subjunctive because they feared, secondary sequence in the past, that he was not, at the same time they were scared, he was not present. The same time they feared that he was not present, he wasn't there. So we want the imperfect subjunctive. So ad esset, timuerunt ut ad esset. Veritisunt ut ad esset. Quinta, sententia quinta. You fear that I will remain. You're scared I'm going to stay. You fear that I will remain. You fear, present tense. So times, vereris. We are in primary sequence, present tense, that I will remain. Now notice there is no future subjunctive. And we will not use the future indicative here. This has to be a subjunctive because it's a dependent subjunctive clause, a fearing clause. When you see a will in a fearing clause, you're going to go with the present subjunctive because it shows a subsequent action to the main verb. You fear that I subsequently will stay. that I subsequently after this remain. So that's the present subjunctive. We want the present subjunctive of maneo, manere, mansi, mansus. So you fear that I will remain. Times, and then I will do this. Nay, you don't want me to do this because you're scared of it. Nay, don't do this. Times or vereris, nay, I will remain. So I could say maneam, maneam, the present subjunctive of maneo. If I really wanted to emphasize the futurity, the futureness of this, there's also the option, some authors do, of using the future active participle of the verb, so mansurus, and then a helping verb in the form of the present subjunctive of sum. So I would use sim, mansurus sim. So times, ne, mansurus sim. If an author really wants to emphasize the subsequent futurity of this action, instead of using the present, he'll use the future active participle plus a helping verb, the present subjunctive of sum. So here that would be sim. That is an option. Sexta, sententia sexta. He will ask whose friends saw her. He will ask whose friends saw her. Now we've switched gears slightly here to indirect questions. He will ask. So we have an asking verb, rogo, rogare. How about rogabit? Rogabit, he will ask. Whose friends saw her? There's the direct question. Whose friends saw her? So we're asking whose. The friends of whom saw her. So inside this little clause here, we've got friends is the subject of the subjunctive verb saw, and her is the direct object of the subjunctive verb saw. Whose is genitive. It equals of whom. So possessing the nominative subject, friends. So here we have subjunctive. This is primary sequence because of the future tense. We have future tense, then it'll be followed by the present or the perfect subjunctive. He will ask in the future whose friends saw. They have already seen her. It's already happened. The scene has already happened. That's a prior action to the main verb. So we want the perfect subjunctive. He will ask, rogabit. Now this whose, it has to be a genitive. You could say cujus for a singular. Unfortunately, the English doesn't tell us the number based upon the interrogative. So it could be the singular cujus, or it could be the plural masculine quorum, or plural feminine quorum. Could be a bunch of girls. So rogabit, I'm just going to go with the singular cujus, amici, eam, and then we want the perfect subjunctive of video, videre, vidi, visus. So viderent, viderent. Rogabit cujus amici eam viderent. You should always be able to pick out the direct question and the indirect question. It's introduced by the verb he will ask. So the direct question is whose friends saw her. Septima, I knew what she was saying. You should be able to pick out the direct question. What was she saying? Question mark. Now I knew what she was saying. Now it's an indirect question. It's not a direct question. You're not directly asking the question. Now you're recasting the direct question as an indirect question. I knew what she was saying. So this verb, I knew, introduces the indirect question. The verb will be in the subjunctive. So I knew. We have skio, skiere, skiwi, skitus. Science, scientia, that's the noun form of skio. That's stuff that we know. Science is the collective knowledge of stuff that we know. So skio, skiere, skiwi, skitus. I knew, past tense. We don't say I knowed, we say I knew. So perfect. Skiwi, what she was saying. So we want quid. It could be what things she was saying. So you could say quae, the neuter plural, but let's stick with the singular quid. Skiwi, quid. I'm going to say ea, ea, the feminine nominative singular of is ea id. Otherwise, we might assume that it's a guy as the subject of the verb because Latin's a sexist language. Skiwi, quid, ea, was saying. Now we're in secondary sequence. What was she saying at the same time that I knew about it? So same time, contemporaneously. I knew what she was saying at the same time she was saying it. When she was saying it, I knew it. So contemporaneous, imperfect subjunctive. Dico, dicere, dixi, dictus. We want diceret, diceret. Scivi quid ea diceret. Scivi quid ea diceret. I knew what she was saying. Octava, sententia octava. He wants to find out whether they came or not. So here we have a disjointed, whether or not. So he wants to find out. Okay, to find out. We have cognosco. I'm sorry, to find out. He wants to. First we have to do once. You guys are going to want to use cupia, cupere, cupivi, cupitus. Because you're scared of wolo, welle, wolui, because it's an irregular verb. It's not very irregular, but third person singular of cupio is cupit. For wolo, it's wult. So wult and or cupit, and either will take complementary infinitive to find out. To find out. Now, this could either be in when that's just to find in venio. This is to find out, a little bit different than to find. Not even really reperio. How about we use cognosco, to learn, to discover, to find out. So cognoscere vult, cognoscere cupit, whether they came or not. Now whether is utrum, utrum, they came or not. Now he wants to, in the present time, primary sequence. Now they've already come. It's already happened. This action has already occurred, so it's a prior action to a primary sequence. He wants to find out whether they have already done this thing. So perfect subjunctive of venio, venire, veni, ventus, macron over the E in the third principal part, so give it when and then erent, venerent, venerent, utrum venerent, and then or not in an indirect question is necne. So something like cognoscere cupit utrum venerent necne. Nona, sententia nona. Did you see what he was doing? Did you see that? Did you see? What? What did I see? What he was doing. There's the substantive. There's the noun clause. What he was doing. Did you see it? So this is a question. Remember, indirect questions can also be questions. It's just you still should be able to pick out the indirect question in this direct question. Did you see? That's the direct question. Did you see? And then the indirect question is, what was he doing? So it's a yes or no question. So add ne, the enclitic ne, to the end of the first word. So did you see? Vidisti ne. Vidisti ne? Did you see? Vidisti ne? What he was doing. Quid, and then what's the sequence? Did you see? Good job, you're right. That is perfect tense, secondary sequence. What he was doing at the same time, contemporaneously that he saw it. He was doing something at the same time. Did you see that? He was doing something. So vidistine, quid, and then we want the imperfect subjunctive of facio, facere, feci, factus, faceret. Vidistine, quid faceret. And decima, sententia decima. I do not know where he will find it. Good luck. I do not know where he will find it. Even though at times the Romans did use non scio, they did have a whole other verb, nescio, nescio, nesciere, nescivi, nescitus, and that one is the more common version. So I do not know, nescio, nescio, I do not know where he will find it. Where is either ubi or quo, where he will find it. So he will find it. This is going to be a subsequent action to a primary tense, I do not know, where he will some point in the future find it. So we want the present subjunctive Or you could do that fancy thing to use the future active participle plus a form of to be in the subjunctive. So I do not know. Nescio, ubi, quo, or quo, where he will find it. For it, we could say id, the accusative singular neuter of is ea id, the direct object of the verb, where he will find it. So invenio, invenire, inveni, inventus. We could say id inveniat, id in quo id inveniat, ubi id inveniat. Or we could get fancy and do something like inventurus sit. Quo id sit inventurus. Nice. Optime. Very well done. That wraps it up for exercise A. You are now ready to move on to exercise B.